The person that I admire the most is my own mother. Despite her not having the best education, she has never gone to school. And raising more than 6 children on her own, I have seen the changes and the hard work that she's put every day to put food on the table. And that for me, if she was given a chance, for instance, to access some of the opportunities that others have been, I'm very sure she would have done more wonders. Up to today, she remains one of the people that I admire the most. If only I could be 1% of who she is and the values that she upholds, being there for others. I think those are the values that I didn't get it even with my master's degree.
I'm your host, Soraya Sinozie, and this is Diaspora and Development, where we give voice to people of the diaspora working in international development. My guest today is Andhira Yousif. Andhira joins the show as an independent researcher with a focus on East Africa and refugee-led research. Working at the forefront of research in the region, she has now collaborated with Oxford and Columbia University on energy access for refugee communities in Uganda, Kenya, and Rwanda. Today, research centers not only on those it is responding to, but creates an environment for their thoughts and ideas as part of a revolution to engender meaningful participation. Let's step into this world and find out how Andhira is shaping impactful research. Thank you so much for joining us today, Andhira. We'll get into the work that you've done with Oxford and Columbia University later, but can you tell us what you've been working on lately?
Lately, I am doing a fellowship at Columbia, so working on my own research, and the research is going to be an extension of the work I've done with refugee-led organizations. But this one is particularly, I'm looking at the importance of funding and the impact of that and what organizations or funders are looking at. Besides that, I am hoping to join funding organizations very soon to work now on hopefully full-time now position. So I'm looking forward to think about or to even work now from a funding perspective or from a journal perspective. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about why funding is important and how these organizations are normally funded?
So funding is quite important, not only for smaller organizations to work effectively, but also for the beneficiaries to actually get direct services that they actually need. And I think also funding is very related to so many other aspects, including, voices, including participation, including political or maybe system change and other changes that can be even politically. So I think it's quite important when it is done right and it is done to the right people, with the right people as well. I think for the longest time, funding has been channeled to big organizations that have stayed in the humanitarian sector for quite some time, but very little changes. And in terms of, if I'm looking at where my specialty is displacement, and particularly displacement within Africa context, where there are refugees that are, I think right now what is happening, we're seeing words being thrown around. There's immigration, immigrants, for instance. There is probably people displaced because of climate change. And again, within East Africa particular, most of the refugees are actually displaced because of war, because the neighboring countries, Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, Congo are actually actively right now in war. So most of the refugees within East Africa are actually displaced because of war. And that also poses a very different, they come with very different expectations, but also hope for the future. Because if it's immigrants, for instance, it's economic benefits. If it's climate change, then it's a very different way. It's a very different from people who are displaced from war. Mm-hmm. And once hosted in these countries, they are expected to go back after some time or when the war has ended. But these wars have been there for the last 30 years. I was born in Sudan. Yes.
That's very note. Mm-hmm. The UNHCR says there are over 43 million refugees in the world, and that number has tripled in the last decade. The status of a refugee, as you mentioned, is supposed to be temporary. Some eventually returned home. Some resettled in other countries. But it seems a temporary status also has been prolonged in the past decade. Give us some more insight on why, as you were doing.
One of the obvious reasons is that the four solutions or the two solutions you've mentioned, the going back home and maybe accessing a third solution, which is now resettlement, has not necessarily worked because the going back home, countries are not getting there's no peace. So for the last 50 years or 30 years for refugees, for instance, who are from Sudan and are staying in Kenya or maybe from Somalia or Congo. And as we know, with so many political changes and every year there's minimal and countries are accepting lesser and lesser refugees, the third or maybe the developed countries. So definitely now the resettlement is very much challenged. With the recent developments with the US, I think now it's quite a lot of refugees now would not be able to find the solution of accessing resettlement in the US. That has been probably the biggest country that has been resettling refugees. So with that in mind, then the countries that are hosting these refugees temporarily will have to rethink about it. And refugees are, the essence that we are just there temporarily. 20 years is not temporary. 10 years and above. So there's need for more solutions. There's need for integration as well. And for them to contribute to the countries that they are staying in, in future, probably they can be able to access some of these other solutions, like going back home, or maybe now contribute a lot to the countries that they're actually staying in. For instance, in Kenya, that has been hosting refugees in 2 camps for the last maybe 20, 30 years. And within those communities now, they're quite embedded within the community there. Some of the children are born in Kenya. They don't know anywhere else. I think there's need to rethink about solutions for refugees in that regard. Yeah.
Can you tell us what led to your interest in this research? What motivates you? What's your story?
2 things. One of the things is there's so many research on displacement and development. And one of the things that I see, there's a lot of extraction. I see Kakuma refugee camp as an over-researched. They say it's an over-researched, one of the camps that are quite over-researched. But who is researching? Who is doing this research? I think is the question that I was asking myself. And where does the results go? And does it make any difference to actually come and, research over and over again the same community with no intent of actually this research bringing any results? So I think my motivation for that was I was questioning the work. I was questioning being in that setting. I have had, I've been a participant for so many researchers, and I'm like, where are these researchers? I don't even see them. I don't even read them. So I'm thinking, are we guinea pigs for testing what research is? So for me, when I started, that was my main motivation for that. But again, I consider myself a decolonized scholar because I believe in the knowledge that is, where is the voice of the insider? Mm-hmm. And what change can that bring in? So when refugees are actually researchers themselves, what happens? What more new thing can they bring? Or what more new insights? And probably they look at different ways of looking at how research is done. And probably it can bring a change and a lasting change for that. So that for me also was my motivation for actually doing this work and bringing the voice that is actually from the community.
Okay. Thank you. And you're a former refugee yourself?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that story?
I would say, is it former? I'm still a refugee, so I don't know if I should call it a former or yes, because I think my status hasn't changed yet, but I'm hoping in the next few years, probably it will change. But it has come. I was born in Sudan in the early 90s and grew up in Sudan until the 2000 is where I was staying in central Sudan, is where the conflict is quite rural. And that's what conflict when it erupted. We somehow were rescued and we got to seek opportunity in Kenya. So we came to Kenya with my mother in the early 2000s. And that's how I have been to Kenya now as a refugee for the last 25 4+ years.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's the thing. That's not temporary anymore.
No.
We become hybrid cultures.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. There's much discussion on the effectiveness of humanitarian aid today. A lot of large NGOs and UN agencies such as the IOM, UNHCR respond to the needs of many refugees. Little is known about refugee-led organizations. Can you tell us about the research and the role that these refugee-led organizations play?
Yes. And they have been playing. The thing is, refugee-led organizations have been around for some time. And since actually the beginning of some of these camps, because essentially human beings, once they're not in their own cohabiting, they tend to form something in order to bring them together. So they have been somehow working in different names, maybe just groups, or maybe, not necessarily registered, but there has been those organizations with different communities working on different issues besides actually other NGOs that come in and providing other services. But some of these services are actually being provided by the communities themselves through some of this organized. So during COVID-19, there was just a shift in so many things. And one of the shifts NGOs had been, or these bigger humanitarian organizations were working within these camp settings and also helping out with the urban refugees, couldn't do the same work that they've been doing because of the restrictions, because of their proximity to the community, and because of the risks that COVID-19 brought. So who was left was actually the organizations that are actually working within community. And those are the organizations that are called refugee-led organizations. And I would say they have been there, but no one has written about them. No one was talking about them because it wasn't an interest. So with so much research that has been there, no one was talking about them. And I think when Refugee-Led Research Hub, together with University of Oxford and Carleton, the first work of I think it was done by Oxford researchers on, organized community-based organizations within the camp areas. They thought that there's need to be able to understand this, to be able to understand who are these refugees, what do they do, and how many are they even in different countries. So that's the project I was able to embark in to write about refugee-led organizations within Kenya. So I led the Kenya project, but the project was an East African one. So we were 4 researchers and all of us had a refugee background, and we did in 4 different countries. So Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Ethiopia. So that has been the beginning of the research on refugee-led organizations. So since then, I've worked now with different organizations, just particularly on this subject here.
Your research looked at access to energy in refugee camps. Can you tell us what life in a refugee camp looks like? What services do people have access to? And why is energy so important to look at?
That most of the refugee in the camps particular is maybe the basic services, maybe water, health, and education, and shelter. The shelter part, I think the communities actually come to do that on their own, and they build their own ways. It's just other organizations helping them out here and there. But you have our communities that have been living in the same area for the last maybe 1 year. Energy is quite important because everything else actually revolves around energy. Water, all this that I've spoken about actually revolves around energy. But if you look at for instance, the UN, actually even the UNHCR, when they categorize what is important when it comes to emergencies, energy is not part of it. And it comes up later. And that is problematic in itself because we're talking about environmental degradation. If you look at Kenya in particular, refugees are kept in certain areas that are lacking a lot of services related to transportation, energy, for instance. So that can not only lead to, the access of that within the communities that they're living in, but also can lead to conflicts with the hosting communities because we're looking for firewood that is needed every day, water and all this. And those are resources that are so much needed. And there's scarcity of it, then we somehow are going to cross paths. And that can cause discomfort and conflict within such communities. So with that, I think my interest also is like, what are these small community-based organizations actually doing in order to help out in this area? And there's quite very creative refugee-led organizations or refugee businesses themselves.
Can you tell us a little bit of what they're doing to be creative?
So for instance, they are using solar or maybe creatively using solar to provide lights to their own communities. And sometimes because of registration issues, sometimes it's even illegal to do that. It somehow have their own ways of doing it. In terms of cooking, they're bringing out like very innovative stoves, for instance, and make stoves that are going to use less energy and preserve energy as well, and somehow provide lights at the end of the day. And, coming up with studios or maybe places where maybe children or young people are able to meet and, watch something together or, have an access to Wi-Fi that is on a central. So most of these CBOs would open maybe cyber cafes and help out, young people that needs to access, internet and other access that they cannot do it from home. So there's so many creative ways of how refugees are creating, their daily life and moving around and see what works and what cannot work, and what can help out within their communities that they're living in. Yeah.
So often working with refugee communities, the emphasis is on the immediacy of aid. Why is research important? What changes can it bring about to the way people work with affected communities?
Yes. Like I mentioned earlier, when there is over-research on one thing and research is done based on donor needs and not community needs, then there's a problem. So the importance of bringing in new knowledge, it's not new, but actually making this knowledge available in order to help with system changes, in order to help with mindsets change of people who are actually bringing this money. Because if your target or if your interest as a donor is to be able to, and you would see most of the donors, their mission, their vision is to better lives of people or make it better for other people. Then how are you making it better if you don't know actually what is better to these communities? You cannot imagine better for me is this.
And what is donor driven? That's interesting that you say that. I've worked in the international development field for many years and also worked very briefly in humanitarian field. And one of the things I realized, you mentioned it clearly, that if you don't know the community. And so sometimes I see that people don't seem to think that people in vulnerable situations have dreams and inspirations and aspirations. And so they give them the bare minimum. So what do you mean by donor-driven research?
I think they're the ones that drive what to research on and who to even contract to research and which research for them is very acceptable, for instance. Is it done by Oxford? Is it done by, Columbia, for instance? And what if it's done by University of Nairobi? Does it make any difference? What if it's done by Masinde Muliro that is very closer to actually the company, or University at Turkana? And what does it mean to actually collaborate with this local knowledge and people who are actually producing this knowledge locally to be able to bring their advancement and not necessarily have only the mindset that whatever works for us is what we are giving you and not necessarily what we want to work with you or what we want to take from you as well. So I think that's what I meant by, that's donor-driven. Research can be problematic, because it's not based on what community wants.
And what does it look like if research then informs the way you work with communities? What would that look like?
I think for me, it will look like informed ways of working, informed ways of finding solutions, because there's constant improvement, there's also community acceptance and things that actually can work within certain contexts and within certain communities. It's not imagined or fantasized solutions, but actually solutions that are brought by the people that are affected by certain issues.
If I could grant you one wish that would change the way organizations work with refugee communities for the better, what would you wish for?
Go directly to work with civilians. That would be my wish. Yes.
Work directly
Yes.
with
And avoid so many misconceptions about them. Go directly, no matter how hard it is. There has to be a way. Yeah.
Is there any organization or person that you admire in this field? Who are they and why?
In the field particularly?
Doesn't have to be, but somebody that you admire in this. It could be in this field or it could be in something else.
Yes. Whenever I'm asked this question, I actually, the expectation is to look at big people. Of course, there are people that I really admire that work on different issues. But I think one of the people that I quite admire, like on a bigger scale, is Wangari Maathai from Kenya, the environmentalist. And I think for her also, it's the fact that she was very much connected to not only what mattered to her own communities, but she fought for that in a manner that she saved so much that later on, right now, we look at and we go to certain forests and we're like, if she was not there, we will not have this up to now. And we couldn't see, and then definitely no one could see that importance for her bringing solutions to her own community at that point. When you're looking at development, when you're looking at, good roads and parks, and most of the African leaders come on this side, look at what is happening, and they want to come and copy paste whatever is happening in the West back home. Does that work? Does it work for us? Is that what we want in terms of development? And what does that mean also to us as a community? Does it mean destroying all our forests and putting up, bigger stories of houses and not necessarily preserving what we've had for all these years? So I think for her, she is one of those women that I look up to, and I'm like, those people that work actually with the communities that matter to them somehow later on have solutions that are community embedded. But besides that, the person that I admire the most is my own mother.
Tell us about it.
Yes. She, despite her not having the best education, and not only the best education, but she has never gone to school, and raising, more than 6 children on her own, and being creative within the house, being there for us. And, I have seen the changes and the hard work that she's put every day to put just food on the table. And that for me, if she was given a chance, for instance, to access some of the opportunities that others have been, I'm very sure she would have done more wonders. Up to today, she remains one of the people that I admire the most. If only I could be 1% of who she is, and the values that she upholds in terms of honesty, hospitality, and, being there for others. I think those are the values that I didn't get it even with my master's degree. Got it from my mother.
You did get it from your mom. I think you have more than 1% of yourself maybe in your mom. Through your work, she's certainly alive through the work you do. So way more than 1%. What are you most proud of in your years of research?
I'm most proud of who I am being referred to in my community right now. I think besides, research being, just papers that are being produced somewhere in library and people go and watch, I think I tried to make it a bit community, so that my first research, one of the important parts that I wanted in terms of dissemination is how do I actually take back to the community and say, you know what, we were thinking about this and we found out this and this, and make it in a way that they're going to absorb that without, most of them have not gone to school. Most of them would rarely care about what happens to research. So whenever I am referred to, oh, that girl who does research, it makes my heart happy, because that's my identity right now. And I'm proud of that. Yeah.
Lovely. What is one thing you'd like people to know about being a refugee?
Wow. That we have dreams and talents and they are valid. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Andhira. On that note, we'll end. Thank you.
Thank you.
Join us every first Tuesday of the month. Don't forget to like us, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and find us on Instagram and on our website if you'd like to be featured as a guest or have any recommendations for guests. We look forward to hearing from you.